My name is Anna and I am 58 years old. And sometimes when the world goes quiet and the wind moves soft through the streets of Nashville, I can still hear the faint sound of a guitar somewhere far away, like an echo that refuses to fade. I tell myself it is only the wind, but my heart knows better because some sounds never really leave. They live in the walls, in the silence, in the spaces between breaths. And I know it is him. It has always been him, Luke, the boy with storms in his eyes and music in his soul, the one who turned every ordinary moment into a song that still plays in the back of my mind. I live alone now in a small apartment above a coffee shop on a quiet street, the kind of place where life moves slow and the nights stretch long. I have plants by the window and old records stacked on a shelf, a few photos that I rarely look at because they remind me of things that never stopped hurting. There are days when I wake up and the city feels heavy, like it remembers everything I have tried to forget, and other days when sunlight pours through the curtains, and I can almost believe I am young again, before the ache, before the silence, before the long years of waiting. I met Luke when I was 23. I was a waitress in a small diner, the kind that smelled like burnt toast and coffee and dreams that never made it past the counter. The regulars came and went, always talking about what they could have been, and I used to wonder if I would end up like them, stuck between what I wanted and what I had. And then one night he walked in carrying a guitar case and a notebook and a quiet kind of sadness that felt familiar. He sat in the corner booth near the window and started writing on napkins, humming tunes that had no names yet. And something about the way he looked at the world made me stop and stare. For weeks he came every night, always the same table, always the same order: black coffee, 2 sugars and toast. And he would sit there for hours, lost in his own world, writing music like he was trying to put his heart back together piece by piece. One night when I brought his refill, he looked up and said, "Do you believe in destiny?" And I laughed because I had long stopped believing in anything that sounded that fragile. And I said, "Only when it hurts." And he smiled, that slow, soft smile that could melt the coldest night, and said, "Maybe that is when it is real." And that was the first moment something changed inside me. After that we started talking small things, at first about music, about the kind of people who came through the diner, about how strange it was that two strangers could feel so familiar so fast. He told me he had been traveling for years, chasing songs and stages that never really led anywhere, that he played in bars for people who never listened. But somehow he kept going because music was all he knew. I told him I used to paint but stopped because somewhere along the way I forgot how to dream. He said, "Maybe you just need someone to remind you what it feels like." And I didn't know then that he was talking about himself. We started walking home together after my shifts, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we sat on the rooftop of my building watching the lights of the city shimmer like stars that had fallen too far. He would bring his guitar and play the softest melodies, songs without words, songs that felt like promises. And I would close my eyes and think, maybe this is what it means to be alive again. We were both young and broke, but somehow we had everything that mattered: our laughter, our dreams, our quiet kind of love that grew in the spaces between the noise. Every night he would sing at open mics and I would sit in the front row cheering louder than anyone else. And he would always look for me in the crowd, his eyes finding mine. And for that brief moment it felt like the world disappeared, like it was just us, and the song he was singing was meant only for me. People said we were foolish, two dreamers chasing a feeling that could never last, but I didn't care because those nights were pure magic, the kind that leaves marks on your soul. Sometimes we would talk about the future, about how he wanted to write a song that would live longer than both of us, and how I wanted to paint again and fill my walls with color. He said one day we would have a little house by the sea where he could write and I could paint, and every morning the sun would rise through our window like a promise. We both believed it, because when you are young, love makes everything possible, even forever. And then one night, he came home breathless, eyes shining like stars, saying he had been offered a record deal, a real one, with a label in Los Angeles. And I remember how time stopped, how the sound of the city faded, and it was just him standing there holding his dream in his hands, his voice shaking, when he said, "I don't want to go without you." And I said, "You have to go, Luke. This is everything you ever wanted. I will wait right here. We can survive the distance." I believed that because love makes you believe in impossible things. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "I will write to you every day, and when I am done I will come back with a song that is only yours." And I watched him walk away under the streetlight carrying that old guitar and a piece of my heart. And for a long time after he left I could still feel his presence everywhere, in the smell of rain, in the hum of the city, in the way my heart ached every night. For the first few months his letters came often, pages filled with love and stories about recording and long nights in the studio. He would describe sunsets in California and say he missed the way the city lights reflected in my eyes. He wrote about songs that reminded him of me and said he was writing one that would be ours. I would sit on my bed reading his words over and over until the ink began to blur from my tears. I kept every letter tied with a red ribbon hidden in a box under my bed like a secret treasure. But then the letters started coming less often, then shorter, sometimes just a few lines saying he was tired, busy, overwhelmed. And I told myself it was just the distance, that everything would be okay, that dreams always took time. But deep down I felt the silence creeping in like a shadow. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and slowly his voice began to fade from the pages of my life. The letters that once came with the smell of coffee and rain now came rarely, and sometimes not at all. I would check the mailbox every morning, heart pounding with a hope that never learned how to die. And when it was empty I would tell myself, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe when the song is finished, because that is what love does. It keeps waiting even when it knows it shouldn't. Then one night while closing the diner I heard a song playing from the radio, soft and low, the kind that makes you stop breathing for a second. And when I listened closer I heard his voice, the same voice that once whispered dreams in the dark, only now it was everywhere. And the world was listening. His song was beautiful, haunting, full of pain and longing. But it was not about me, I knew it instantly. It was about another story, another face, another moment I had never lived, and it felt like the floor beneath me gave way, like my heart had been rewritten by someone else's melody. The customers clapped, the cook turned up the volume, and said, "That guy is gonna be big one day," and I smiled, because what else could I do? I smiled and nodded and said, "Yeah, he will." And when I walked home that night the streets felt colder than ever, the sound of his song following me like a ghost. I didn't sleep. I played the radio over and over, waiting to hear his voice again, trying to find myself somewhere in his words. But I wasn't there. It was as if he had erased me from the music of his life. Days turned into years. I kept waiting, telling myself he would come back when the tour was over, when the fame settled, when the world stopped demanding so much of him. But he never did. I still went to work, still smiled at customers, still made coffee, and wrote his name on napkins when no one was looking. Some nights I painted again, soft strokes of blue and gray, trying to capture the emptiness that he left behind, but nothing filled it. Time kept moving as if it didn't notice that my heart had stopped somewhere along the way. And then life did what it always does, it found a way to go on even when you don't want it to. I met someone else, a kind, gentle man named David, who came into my life like calm after a storm. He loved me quietly, patiently, never asking for more than I could give. He didn't play guitar, he didn't write songs, but he listened, he really listened, and sometimes that felt like music too. We got married in a small church outside the city, nothing grand, nothing loud, just the two of us, and a promise to try again, to build something out of the pieces that were left. I never told him about Luke, not the full story, just bits and shadows, because some memories are too sacred, too fragile to share. We bought a small house with a porch that faced the west, and every evening I would watch the sunset and think about how it might look from Los Angeles, where Luke was maybe standing under the same sky, maybe holding a guitar, maybe thinking of me, though I knew better. We had a daughter, Grace. Her name was his idea, though he didn't know it. He said it was a beautiful name, simple, pure, strong. And when she was born and I held her tiny hands, I felt something shift inside me, like maybe the universe was giving me a second chance at love, the kind that doesn't leave, the kind that stays even when the music stops. David adored her. He would dance with her in the living room while I watched from the doorway. And for a while it was enough, it really was. But love has a strange way of leaving traces no matter how much you try to cover them. Some nights when Grace was asleep and David was reading, I would find myself sitting by the piano, touching the keys softly the way he used to, and the silence would fill with echoes of songs I thought I had forgotten. Sometimes I would turn on the radio and hear his voice again, older, rougher, more distant, and every time it hurt a little less. But it never stopped hurting completely. Then one day everything changed again. David went out for work and never came back. There was an accident, they said, quick, painless, that word they used to make grief sound smaller. But nothing about it felt small, it felt endless. And for a long time I moved through the world like a ghost, raising Grace, working, painting, trying to fill the silence that kept growing around me. She grew up strong and kind and beautiful, And I was proud, but inside a part of me still belonged to another lifetime, to another song. 30 years passed before I heard his name again. By then I had gray hair and soft hands and a heart that had learned to live with its cracks. I had moved to the apartment in Nashville, the one above the coffee shop with the view of the trees and the sound of guitars drifting through the streets. Sometimes I thought maybe he was somewhere out there still singing, still chasing the music that had once carried him away from me. Then one morning there was a knock on my door. I opened it and saw a young man standing there holding a small envelope and a nervous smile. He said his name was Mark, that he was a music producer working on restoring old studio tapes from the 80s. And he said he had found something I might want to hear. I asked what it was, and he said a song called Anna, written and recorded by Luke Mitchell. For a moment I couldn't move. It felt like time had folded in on itself, like the years between us had vanished. I took the envelope from his hand, and inside was a tape, small and old and worn, the label faded, but my name still visible. I played it on the dusty tape deck sitting by my window, and then his voice filled the room, older, deeper, softer than I remembered, and he sang about a girl he left behind, about promises broken, about a song unfinished, and the last line stopped mid-word, like his heart had stopped before the sound could leave him. I sat there on the floor listening to that song over and over as the light shifted across the room and the city outside began to blur into night. His voice wrapped around me like a ghost that had finally found its way home. Every word, every pause carried years of silence and longing that no letter could ever say. It was as if he had recorded the sound of his own heart breaking and left it for me to find someday when I was ready, when I could finally listen without falling apart. I did not cry, not at first. I just sat still, holding my breath, afraid that if I moved the music would disappear, that the spell would break. When the last note faded, it felt like the world stopped breathing with me, and in that silence I whispered the words he never got to finish, "I love you too, Luke," and the room answered with nothing but quiet. But somehow that quiet felt full, like he was there listening, like he had been waiting for me to say it all these years. The young producer Mark told me later that the song had never been released, that the label had kept it in storage, forgotten among hundreds of other tracks. He said they wanted my permission to share it with the world. But I told him I needed time. I didn't know how to explain that this was not just a song, it was a life, a memory, a heartbeat. And I was not sure if I was ready to let it belong to anyone else. He nodded, said he understood, and left me there with the tape and a silence that was no longer empty. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked to the old piano that had gathered dust for years and pressed one key, then another. The sound was out of tune but still alive. I closed my eyes and imagined him sitting beside me, the way he used to, fingers brushing the strings of his guitar, while I played along. The music filled the room, soft and broken, like two ghosts learning how to breathe again. And for the first time in decades I felt something inside me wake up, something that had been sleeping since the day he left. A few days later I found the courage to ask Mark where he had found the tape. He said it was discovered in a box of unreleased demos from a small studio outside Los Angeles. He said Luke had recorded it just weeks before his death. My heart clenched when I heard that word, death. It felt unreal. I had spent so many years half hoping, half pretending he was still out there somewhere, still singing, still living a life beyond the one we shared. But now there was an end to the story, and it had found its way back to me. He told me Luke had died in a car crash late one night on his way back to Nashville, my city, our city. He was coming home. The words hit me like rain, soft but relentless. I thanked him, and after he left I sat by the window all night watching the streetlights flicker like fading stars. I thought about how strange life is, how it takes everything from you, and then one day hands you a small piece of it back just to see what you will do with it. The next morning I went to the flower shop at the corner and bought white lilies, the kind he used to say looked like music in bloom, and one key, then another. The sound was out of tune but still alive. I closed my eyes and imagined him sitting beside me, the way he used to, fingers brushing the strings of his guitar, while I played along. The music filled the room, soft and broken, like two ghosts learning how to breathe again. And for the first time in decades I felt something inside me wake up, something that had been sleeping since the day he left. A few days later I found the courage to ask Mark where he had found the tape. He said it was discovered in a box of unreleased demos from a small studio outside Los Angeles. He said Luke had recorded it just weeks before his death. My heart clenched when I heard that word, death. It felt unreal. I had spent so many years half hoping, half pretending he was still out there somewhere, still singing, still living a life beyond the one we shared, but now there was an end to the story, and it had found its way back to me. He told me Luke had died in a car crash late one night on his way back to Nashville, my city, our city. He was coming home. The words hit me like rain, soft but relentless. I thanked him. And after he left, I sat by the window all night watching the streetlights flicker like fading stars. I thought about how strange life is, how it takes everything from you, and then one day hands you a small piece of it back just to see what you will do with it. The next morning I went to the flower shop at the corner and bought white lilies, the kind he used to say looked like music in bloom. And then I took a taxi to the cemetery just outside the city where he was buried. The driver asked if I wanted him to wait, but I said no, this was something I needed to do alone. I found his grave under a large oak tree, sunlight spilling through the branches like gold dust, and I sat down beside it, the grass cool beneath my hands. For a while I couldn't speak, I just listened to the wind moving through the leaves. It sounded like the ocean, like his guitar, like every goodbye I had ever whispered. I told him everything I had never said, how I waited, how I loved, how I tried to move on. But never could I told him about David, about Grace, about how she grew up to be kind and brave, and how sometimes when she hums a tune, I can hear traces of him in her voice. I told him about the years, the silence, the ache, and the way his song had found me again after all this time. When I was done, I took the tape from my bag and placed it beside his stone. I said, "Here is your song, Luke, you finished it after all." And for a moment it felt like the wind stopped, like the world itself was listening. I stayed there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and blue, the same colors he once said belonged to me. I closed my eyes, and for a second I could almost feel his hand in mine, warm and steady like before. That night when I returned home, I played the tape one last time and let it fill every corner of the apartment. I painted as it played, strokes of gold and gray across a blank canvas, until my hands ached and the tears blurred my vision. When I was done, I looked at the painting and saw everything we had been: love, loss, hope, memory, all tangled together in a way that somehow felt whole. Now every night I sit by the window with my tea and the soft hum of the city below, and I play that same song, letting it move through the air like a heartbeat that refuses to fade. Sometimes when the wind passes through the trees, I can hear the faint echo of a guitar answering back, and I know it is him, still playing, still keeping time with me. Because some loves do not end, they just change shape. They become echoes in the wind, whispers in the dark, unfinished songs that keep singing even after the music stops. And every time the last note fades, I whisper into the quiet, "I am still here, Luke, and maybe somewhere beyond this world he hears it and plays the next line, because the song he never finished still lives inside me, still waiting, still alive." And in that small, endless rhythm, I finally understand that love never truly ends, it just finds another way to be heard. The years kept moving like slow waves against the shore, and I kept living in the rhythm of quiet mornings and soft nights. Sometimes I would paint, sometimes I would walk to the park near the river where he once played his guitar under the old willow tree. Children would run past chasing birds, and I would smile because the sound of their laughter reminded me that life goes on even when our hearts are heavy with things we cannot forget. Sometimes I would see a couple sitting together, their hands brushing, and it would hurt and heal at the same time. Grace grew older, she had his eyes and his calm. She would visit on weekends and play songs on her phone, asking me if they reminded me of him. I would laugh and say yes, though the truth was everything reminded me of him, even the quiet, even the sound of rain tapping against the window late at night. I told her once that love is not about staying together, it is about becoming part of each other so deeply that even when one of you is gone, the other carries both hearts inside their chest. She smiled and said she believed that, and I think she did. On the day of my 75th birthday, Grace came with a small gift wrapped in brown paper. It was an old record. She said the label had decided to finally release Luke's lost song after restoring it properly. They called it Unfinished Road, and his name shone softly in gold letters beneath the title. My hands shook when I touched it like I was holding time itself. We played it on her record player, and the sound came alive, warm and full, and for a moment it felt like the years between then and now had folded into nothing. People all over began to talk about the song, saying it felt like a confession whispered by a man who had loved too much and lost too soon. They said I made them cry, made them remember, made them forgive. And I thought maybe that was what he wanted after all, not fame, not applause, just a way to remind people that love, even broken love, is worth remembering. Months passed and the painting I had made that night still hung on my wall, soft colors blending into each other like light and shadow. I decided to donate it to a small music gallery in Nashville. They said they would place it beside the photograph of Luke taken during his last session. I smiled and said that would be perfect because art and memory belong together always. As the years grew gentler, I began to feel him less as absence and more as presence, not beside me, but within me, like a soft hum that never stopped. There were nights when I would wake and hear music in my dreams, his guitar faint and far, but clear, like it was coming from the other side of time. And I would whisper into the dark, "I am listening, love," and maybe that was enough. One evening near sunset, I walked to the same hill where we had watched the lights of the city the night before he left. The air was warm, and the sky was wide open, brushed with the same orange-blue haze that used to live in his eyes. I closed mine and let the wind move through my hair, and in that moment, I felt something shift, something calm and endless. I knew I was not saying goodbye, I was saying thank you for finding me, thank you for loving me, thank you for the song. Years later, when Grace would tell my story to her own children, she would say her mother once loved a man who wrote music that never died. She would say that sometimes when the wind blew through the trees, she could hear their laughter echoing together like a promise that never faded. And maybe she is right, because even now, somewhere beyond time, beyond sound, beyond the breath of this world, I believe he is still playing, still writing the rest of the song we began together, still waiting for the moment when I will join him again, and we will finish it at last. Until then, I sit by the window as the night falls, the record spins, the melody drifts through the room, and I close my eyes, feeling the music fold around me like a memory, like a prayer, like the sound of a heart that never learned how to stop loving. And in that quiet, unending space, I finally understand love is not a chapter, it is the whole book. It is the story that keeps writing itself, even when the hands that began it are gone. It is the song that keeps playing in the wind, in the silence, in the soul that remembers. And so it ends, and it does not end, because somewhere in the soft breath between one note and the next, he is still there, and I am still listening, and the music still lives on forever.